Hello, and welcome to The Distillery. I'm your host, Harry Li Shanglun. The Distillery is an online series of interviews streamed from the lands of the people of the Kulin Nations. I pay my respect to their elders, past and present. Today, we have special guest, Lorna Hannan, OAM. Hello, Lorna. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. I'm so pleased to be able to chat with you in this pandemic. How have you been surviving or thriving or otherwise in these uncertain times?
That is a really fairly difficult question to answer because I feel as though each day has presented me with more change and more challenges. And although that's exciting in a way and interesting, of course, it's interesting, it's also a bit bewildering. And although I think one of the jobs, especially when you're old, is to be not to be averse to being bewildered. Yet there is a lot of public worry, which is beyond bewildering, and I wish it wasn't there. And so I'm in the same land as everybody else. I wish it wasn't there. I wish it would go away, and it hasn't.
I like that you said the role, particularly for elderly people, is to not be bewildered. May I ask, how old are you, Lorna?
I'm 86. I told somebody on the tram I was 87, and that was a lie. I'm 80.
How sneaky. Do you lose track, or did you know that you were lying?
I knew I was lying.
Oh, naughty. And Lorna, you've been a resident of North Melbourne for over 50 years and therefore have a deep connection with the place and the people and community. And actually last year, Lorna, you were awarded with the Medal of the Order of Australia for your service to community. Congratulations, and what a wonderful accolade. Can you tell me more about what it means to have lived through that long of a time and have a history with the place and your connection to North Melbourne?
Well, you don't set out to have a long history with a place. You set out to be there. So I arrived to live in North Melbourne with 2 little kids and a baby and a father for the 4th child who would be born later. And so all those kids grew up in North Melbourne. They grew up among the other kids who live in North Melbourne. We walked the same streets. We swam at the same swimming pool. We were part of that world. And I found it friendly, diverse, interesting, and very accepting. And so I never went away. Here I am still.
Do you think those values are still observable, and how have they changed over the years?
Well, the North Melbourne I came to live in was a place that many people from Europe were also coming to make their lives here. That was the era of post-war migration. It was also the era of post-war reconstruction, which phrase I loved when I was a little kid because it meant that the world was going to be rebuilt and rebuilt in wonderful ways, which we haven't always succeeded in doing, but at least we had the dream. Anyway, back to what I was saying. It was a world into which more layers of migrant people arrived. And so with each group of people came new ideas, new understandings, and greater complexity, interest in the community itself. So it became a richer place while I lived here and went about my business, shopping, sweeping the floor, being a teacher, joining local organisations. The place became a richer place around me and a wonderful place to live in.
That's really wonderful. I love that articulation of immigration and increased diversity of a space makes it richer and a better place to be.
Yeah, and it's very interesting that just right at the moment, we are we are a community which has responded to the pandemic like everybody. The virus is there, and because of the virus, we walk apart in the street, we wash our hands, we stay locked in our houses. We do those things on behalf of everybody and as part of the world of everybody. That's how we do those things. But at the same time as that is happening, we can see that there are some people who aren't as comfortable as we are. North Melbourne is a place which has often had homeless people living in it and services for them. So there are homeless people, there are poor people, there are confused people who aren't part of this move together to try and find a solution. But they are somehow or the other locked out. A big job faces us, Harry, a big job in the future, which is to build a world where they are not locked out.
So you're saying that... sorry, go on.
At the same time as those people are locked out, a whole lot of other people have been welcomed in, not just in North Melbourne, but we noticed it especially because we have big hospitals near here. The roles of nurses and street cleaners and teachers have suddenly become of enormous community importance and value. So some people have been absorbed into with a new dignity, which we will need to keep, which we need to hold close to us because it shows us a lot about what we are.
So you're observing that there are people who are not being made part of this kind of move towards a better society. They're being left behind or marginalized, including people who are homeless, living rough, or people who don't maybe have access to the same privileges that other people in the same communities do have. And then you're also acknowledging that there are other people who have been welcomed with dignity, with acceptance and enthusiasm, including teachers, nurses, people who are kind of doing the very vital work during this pandemic. And you were a teacher for many years. Does that? What is the importance of the role of a teacher in times like this?
Well, some people think the caricature of a teacher is of a person standing out in front of the class talking like mad and telling kids off and making them do probably uncomfortable things.
Yes.
That's the caricature. Everybody knows it's a caricature. But what everybody doesn't know is what is at the other end of that continuum. And at that other end is a co-learner, a companion to the student, somebody who goes through the learning process as a way of teaching, somebody who takes kids on a pilgrimage, searching out what in the long run they need and want themselves. So the role of the teacher, it is sometimes an uncomfortable role, but mostly it's one that not only opens up the students, let's hope, but also opens the teacher to the experience of enjoying the company of young searching minds, their enthusiasm, their energy. Teaching is a worthy way to spend some of your life.
That's brilliant. And I think we've chatted before about the vitality, the importance of cooperation to move society forward together. So yeah, the role of a teacher as a co-learner, as a collaborator is a really beautiful image.
Mm-hmm. But one of the disconcerting things about that is that all my life I believed until 2 or 3 months ago that cities were great places to gather people together in, for them to be able to find what they want to do and search and go to the footy and go to the movies and go to the races, go with lots of other people. And now suddenly That's not what is good. So we've got to think again about how are we going to keep what was good about that, and how are we going to adapt to this new world where the very things that were good before are now presenting us with difficulties.
And thinking on that city scale, I mean, you were a councillor during the 1990s for the city of Melbourne, and have thought a lot about the physical structures of community, like you mentioned, going out and meeting together. What kind of world do you think we should be building now?
If you had asked me that question in February of this year, I would have been really ready to answer about the use of open space in the city and the wonderful policy that the City Council has of the urban forest, the idea that we think of the trees with the buildings among them rather than the buildings with a few trees along the street, and how nature inhabiting the city with us enhances nature and our lives as well. I would have been very happy saying all that in February. But now I'm a bit confused about what we really should be doing, because I think we need smaller centres, not big cities. And so I don't want to talk about it. But I do want to say that in the 1990s, one of the ways in which the city changed a lot was that the City Council decided that the centre of the city should be residential as well as everything else that it was. And that has changed and made life exciting and interesting. But now we have to think about how to keep residents and people living in close proximity to each other, how are we going to keep them safe? How are we going to change the way we think? And because we have the best brains here and there, we have everything we need to think about this. There will be solutions, but we have to be resolute. We have to look for them, and we have to set aside some of the things that we thought were making us feel comfortable before.
I love this resilience of changing what is important or what we should be asking with the current conditions. And also that notion of cities being smaller. I know you said you don't want to talk more about it, but it reminds me of something I was reading recently, that, there is a way to design cities such that they're 15 or 20 minutes in radius, that your community becomes a bit smaller, a bit more like a little village, and you become more connected with the people and places around you.
Harry, North Melbourne is a bit of a village. If you look at North Melbourne, you can see where its boundaries are. And everybody knows if you cross over into West Melbourne that you're no longer in North Melbourne. North Melbourne has always had this kind of feeling of being a bit of a privileged area, a bit of a residential, villagey kind of feeling place. There are families who've lived, not just my family, but families who've lived in the area for more than 100 years. And that gives it a different feel from other parts of the city. And maybe it has a lot to teach other parts of the city too.
Yeah, I'm sure there's so much we can learn. I mean, I know that in the past you've mentioned initiatives. They're not even projects per se, but you just would let her drop an invitation to a barbecue for your local neighborhood and just say, oh, we're going to meet on the lawn here. And I remember you mentioning, I think I've even seen a photo of you doing physically distanced exercise back when such things were allowed, with tape measures saying, look, we're all 2 meters apart and we're all doing our little exercise.
Yes. But I have learnt so much about the local streets since we went into lockdown, and loaves of bread have been left on my front door, for me, because somebody was baking bread and just sort of making some for me as well. Isn't that nice?
That's gorgeous. Really lovely.
Genuinely nice. Yeah.
I think that kind of connection with place and people is really something to strive for and to celebrate in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But we were going to talk also about Refuge.
Yeah, I was just perfect timing. Thank
We were
you.
we were going to talk about how the Arts House in North Melbourne has taken on a different theme each year for 5 years and explored how the community can react to what we will call difficulties, ranging from the difficulty of too much rain or a very hot summer to the difficulty of pandemic or the difficulty of being completely dislodged from your own home and native place. Now, those themes have been taken up at the Arts House by artists and presented to people as in ways that in which they can explore who are we, what kind of community are we, what is our answer to this, how do we look after each other. When artists take on those questions and present people with the possibility of experiencing them in a compressed kind of meaning, artists are doing a wonderful work at building community. They're not just expressing themselves, they're inviting us to come with them. And this is a way in which people can think differently because they've been given the opportunity to think in a different way and become, therefore, bigger here. I don't know what, I'm losing my words.
No. I think I get it. It's not just bigger here as well. It's the bigger here or the bigger here, right? The interpersonal and the empathy. I think you're totally right. Like the involvement of artists and local community in the Refuge project by Arts House, which if you haven't heard of it, you should definitely go check it out. As Lorna mentioned, it's a 5-year interdisciplinary project that looks at climate trauma and how communities in their resilience respond to it, and the ways that we can think about preparedness and artist-led responses. And yeah, as you said, it's just fantastic to see the impact that artists can have by asking those questions and responding to the things that very presciently we found ourselves in. 2018, we had the theme pandemic. And now we're in exactly what was hypothesized.
We made and played with masks. And
there's a whole photo shoot that we were in together.
And we shone blue light on people's hands so they could see where they hadn't washed their hands properly. And doing those things in a theatrical context made them more memorable. And memorable in a different way. It makes you think outside the square. Excellent approach.
And I know that your involvement in Refuge has been something that you've set up called the Ruth Crow Corner. Can you share a little bit about that? Because I think it's wonderful.
When I first came to live in North Melbourne, there was a lady who lived here who walked up and down the streets on her way to do her shopping, carrying a bag on her shoulder. And in the bag were leaflets. And as she came towards you, she would reach into the bag and find the leaflet that she thought suited one of your main interests, or what should have been one of your main interests, and give it to you. Her name was Ruth Crow. She also got an Order of Australia, and she is my mentor, although she's been dead for quite a long time. But she can still speak to me. And so her idea was, if you sit down and talk things through over a cuppa, great things happen. So when it came for Refuge, we gathered people around the table and gave them cups of tea, or got them to make their own cups of tea. Either way, they had cups of tea, and chat and look for the wisdom, the understanding that they needed in order for this community to recognise where it's weak, to start thinking about what to do about it, but also how can we really share the good parts of it as well. So we have Ruth Crow tea, special blend of tea, and Ruth Crow conversations. in which we listen to each other. Now, that's one of the other things that's important here. Listening. Listening isn't just hearing what somebody says and getting ready with your response to what they've said. Listening is also another way of thinking. Letting somebody else come inside you and express ideas that perhaps you're a little bit surprised at first to hear, but which if you really stay with it, you understand, and those ideas can become you as well. So listening, and we have found listening in the Ruth Crow Corner to be very important. Listening becomes another way of thinking, another way of agreeing with each other about what to do, and another way of facing our disagreements. And it also becomes the foundation for truth-telling.
So listening as the foundation for letting you be changed, for genuine connection, as a mode of thinking, and for truth-telling. That sounds like such a powerful agent for making great things happen.
Yes, yes. And Ruth Crow understood that, and she taught us that, and it's part of the tradition of how to live in North Melbourne now. So if there are any young people there who live in North Melbourne, they'd better remember that it's partly their job to continue the art of conversation as a way forward, the art of conversation as a way of being with each other and feeding each other's ideas in.
This is such a great manifesto or call to action, call to a cuppa. And I'm going to send this video now to all of my North Melbourne friends and say, this is your responsibility.
Good.
To continue this tradition. And you've also been involved in other projects at Arts House. As part of the Festival of Live Art, you were part of a show called Sex and Death, very provocatively titled.
Ah, yes.
And I didn't get to go to the show, but it sounds amazing. Can you tell us more about what it was?
Yes, I can. I'm just trying to think to myself, where will I start? If you're going to come to a show of sex and death, you have to book first and find a photograph of yourself when you were younger and bring it with you. When you come, you have an individual experience. You and one other person sit together, think about your younger selves, and face a pack of cards where the questions are all about sex and death and the other things that really matter in life. So you take up a card and you ask the other person who's there with you the question that's on the card. And you promise that you're not going to go out and blather it all over this world afterwards. It's a private conversation. And the experience of the two people is exactly the same. So there's no superiority of the theatre person over the audience person. They're both doing the same thing. They both answer questions put by the other. Well, there is where I really learned to listen, because people come and they tell you the most amazing things. They come knowing that they're going to be talking about sex and death, so they're not just walking in the door like you might walk into the grocery shop or the supermarket or whatever people go to these days.
I mean, if going to the supermarket and thinking about sex and death is commonplace, but you're saying this is very specific, and also you were one of the people that you would have conversation that an audience would have a conversation with, along with other elderly people.
Yes, yeah. But the most important thing about it is that you be prepared for people to say anything, because that's what we're like. And given the opportunity, we amaze each other with what we have to say and our observations on life. Yeah. So it's a bit part date, part entertainment, part serious conversation. It's all of those things all at once. And we've not only done it in Melbourne, but also so far in Amsterdam, and we'll probably be touring it in remote parts of the world.
And I bet that you'll get so many different answers with cultural contexts that are quite different from Australia's, but there will be similarities and always surprising stories when you listen to people and the tales that they have and the experiences they have.
Mm-hmm. But theatre that's made out of real life, theatre which people come and make for themselves, so they make their own narrative, that is so different from going and occupying a seat and watching people on the stage. It's a very different way of expanding your view of human nature and what the world is like. And it makes you feel brave, because you're prepared to, as it were, jump off the high tower with your nose holding your nose and splash right down into the water down there below, in amongst everybody else. And those kinds of conversations, the ones where you know you are equal to the other people, like nobody's superior, everybody's in it together, those kinds of conversations have to be organised, because so much of our life is organised according to some kind of competition. So get away from that, because it's no good in the long run. Well, no, we don't have to get away from it. We have to keep competition in its place. So we have to use
that
where it is valuable, and we need equality and cooperative ways of learning things where they can balance that and allow everybody to reach their full potential, because that's what we want. When you have a baby, which you can't do, which I've done, when you have a baby and there it is, you find yourself looking at something, every bit of its energy wants to learn. And we have to keep as much of that as we can alive in the community and inside our own homes and hearts, because it's beautiful and it can make the world an even more beautiful place. But we have to look forward, Harry, to the having the locked out people brought in and the people who've been brought in kept in.
What an amazing, I mean, you've really just done the distillation for me. Encapsulation of your philosophy and joy and energy. I think finding that sense of childlike wonder and desire to learn and connect, as you put it, when you think about that baby just soaking up the world and doing so in a way that moves us forward together is a brilliant desire, a brilliant thing to have as our clear-eyed goal.
Yeah.
And I feel very blessed by our friendship and all the conversations that we've had as well.
Please tell everybody to do it.
I will, and we have. We're telling everyone who watches this video to go and have good conversations.
Great. Thanks, Harry.
Lorna, it's been such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
It's been easier to talk to you than I thought it would be, because I thought we were in such a muddle that I wouldn't be able to get a word to come out of my mouth. And there you are, you've done it. Thank you.
All your brilliance. Take care, Lorna. See you soon.
Okay. Ciao.
That was Lorna Hannan, and I am Harry Lee Shanglun, host of The Distillery. Thank you so much for watching, and do tune in for future episodes. You can find more information on our website, which is distillery.site, over there, and follow the socials, Instagram at distillery.site and Twitter at distillery_site. New episodes come out every so often, so do check back. Take care, everyone. Stay safe.